Hey Quest Acceptor, glad you could stop by. Today we have an interesting episode talking about player agency and player choice. So let's hit it, Gareth.
Yeah, I had no choice. That dude in the red suit accosted me and tied me up with a whole bunch of reindeer last week.
If you're looking for adventure, excitement, thrills, and a dice-rolling good time, sit back and enjoy the next few minutes with quest givers DM Scotty and DMG. They're taking you on an epic journey through the role-playing experience every Friday. Learn the ways of the Game Master, the Dungeon Master, and delve into the minds of the players. Grab the modules each month to support the channel and play the campaign with your gaming group. You're sure to get hooked on adventure.
Thank you to everyone who has purchased modules through questgivers.com. Don't forget we have our Kickstarter beginning September 1st, and there's other merchandise like these t-shirts that you can also check out there as well. So player agency and player choice. Now, these are huge concepts that a lot of channels talk about, and we're just going to throw our spin into the works here and talk a little bit about what is player agency and what is player choice, because they are actually two distinct and separate things that kind of cross over sometimes, and people talk about them as though they're the same thing. So to kick things off, what is player agency? Now, player agency means that the players are actively involved in creating the content of the story. So they may be before the session or something like that, they may be saying, well, this is my character background and these are the things that will need to be in the story in order for my character to motivate, etc., etc. Or in the actual game, they may start adding elements to it. They may describe a scene that they're in beyond what the DM described. So they're adding visual and thematic elements to the actual description of the scene that they're in. Or when they're in combat and that sort of thing, they're describing actions in a way that helps the rest of the group understand what's actually happening in the game. Your thoughts on player agency?
Oh yeah, player agency. What a great thing in the game, right? It can go from as little as, the players describing, their death blow. That's a very common one in games, but you can go way, way beyond that. You can relinquish control of things in the game to the players. Like recently we talked to Bungwires, and he was saying that he lets his players name the minor NPCs, which is super fun. He also lets them come up with stats for things they find. Like they found a flamethrower and he let them come up with stats for that. And if he kind of agreed with it, they kind of meet a mutual, kind of number, and that was fine. So yeah, and usually he said that he just goes with what they come up with because they're reasonable about asking. They're not going to say, oh, it does 2,000 dice damage, whatever. It's a reasonable number that they think. So that's always really fun in a game to relinquish that control. Now, you have to kind of trust your players to pick up on this, right? Some players are better than others. Some players, I hate to say it, want to be let around on the leash a little more, and they're kind of fine with that, and that's just how they like the game. Other players really like to take control, have the player agency to take control of the story, and you kind of got to find your happy medium with that. What do you like with that? What are you comfortable with that? And that sort of thing. So yeah, but don't be afraid to do it, because you'll get your best ideas sometimes from players, using that player agency to come up with cool ideas for the game. So don't shy away from that.
And agency also comes in forms of some of the mechanics of the game. For instance, one mechanic that most games have would be things like magic or psionics, which in itself is allowing the player to manipulate the environment of the actual game, and you're describing what actually happens. So spells like prestidigitation, press the doo-doo-doo-doo-doo, the dooba-dooba-dooba-doo. That is an extremely narrative-driven spell, which you can describe all manner of cool things with that spell. And so some spells are more, you shoot a fireball, and others are more like you're charming a person. You have to kind of describe how you're actually doing this. If you're creating a phantasm or you're creating an illusion, you need to describe what the illusion is. So the player is taking control of the actual description in the game. They're not necessarily taking control of the narrative. So to me, the narrative is separate from the description. So the narrative is the story points that you have to hit, like, okay, they're going to meet a mentor, they're going to go through a gateway, they're going to do all these sort of things. That still remains the domain of the game master, but the agency of the players is adding in thematic elements that make the world more interesting. That I think is key to player agency, allowing the players to actually describe the environment that they find themselves in. That's very, very important. And I've done that on quite a few occasions where you might say, okay, you walk into the guardhouse and what do you see? And you point to the first character and they will then say, okay, I see a guy behind a desk and I see a rack of weapons. And then you say, okay, and you say to the next player, what do you see and what do you smell? And they say, okay, well, I see this some of the flags of the realm hanging from the ceiling, and it smells like the old stale stew that's cooking in a pot in the corner. And then the third person say, okay, what do you hear? And they say, well, I can hear people, there's clinking of armor and things of people changing, possibly changing in the back room. I then, as the DM, take that information and then put that into the story. The guy behind the desk says, what are you people doing here? This is a forbidden zone. Now, I didn't create the guy behind the desk. The player did. The player created this sense. Now, the moment that the sergeant behind the desk starts speaking up, the people who are changing, that the character created, walk out to see what's happening, what's the commotion all about. The GM did not create this scenario. The players did in their description. So that's what player agency actually is from a thematic and descriptive standpoint. What we're doing in terms of putting in the sergeant, and what the sergeant does is creating the choice that the character has to make, and that's the role of the DM. The DM is there to create problems for the players to solve. So when the players describe something with their agency and they're putting, your job is then to go, okay, well, how do I make this a problem that they need to solve? So in this situation, the sergeant is, what are you doing here? The problem is they're not supposed to be here. How are they going to solve that problem? And that is my role as the GM, and your role as the GM is to consider what are the problems and the stumbling blocks you're going to put in the way of the characters at achieving whatever goal it is that they're setting for themselves.
Another cool thing you could do is say an enemy casts a spell on somebody, right? So some kind of, mind phantasm or something like that that goes into the player's fears and drags something out and terrorizes them with it. Instead of you describing kind of what happens, why not have the player tell you what their character is afraid of, and fill in that blank, and also add some extra cool background to the character that they may have just made up on the spot, but really adds to the story and adds to the flavor of the character, and makes the spell fun.
Yeah, you are still in charge of what's actually going to transpire. Whether it transpires in a wood or in a house or in a valley or wherever, doesn't matter, it's still going to transpire. The old adages of it's like you give a player an option, you can go left or right, doesn't matter which way they're going to the same place. So, narratively, so they're going to meet an old lady that's going to give them a bag of goodies, right? If you go left, you go to the dark forest. If you go right, you go to the small town. So they go to the dark forest, they meet an old lady along the road who's on her way to something or other. That's the thing. They go to the small town, and outside the gate is an old lady who's got a bag full of goodies. It doesn't matter which way they went, you can still hit that narrative point in that thing. So the players have what I call the illusion of choice in that respect. And a lot of people are going to say, well, that's railroading. No! To our way of thinking, if the DM opens their mouth, you are railroading. There's no such thing as no railroading. It just depends on how wide the tracks are as to sort of how much leeway the characters have. And when you look at player agency as the players are adding theme and description to things, that's going to help you. and you are the one who's putting the choices into the game, that's where you start to see how all this starts to get built up.
Oh yeah, I'd like to comment on that. Because I think some GMs or DMs can be afraid of letting players have too much agency and take control, taking control. But remember, you're essentially God, right? You control the narrative, you control the world. So take what they give you and build that in. And oftentimes you can make a richer experience by doing that, because they may think of things you never ever thought of. And they will never know when you use that stuff, right? They'll think, oh, they're geniuses for figuring it out or whatever. But like, you may say, oh, that's even better than what I thought of. I'll take what they're feeding me, what they believe is happening, or whatever they're feeding to me, their characters are giving me, and I'll put it in the story. So yeah, a good DM or a good GM can really do that. And the thing is, don't be afraid to do that. Don't be afraid to do that. And moving on to choice, it's more kind of what your character decides to do in the game, right? So it's like you present the players with problems, with things that happen to them, and they have to react to that. That's their choice. Like if something's orc is trying to take your head off, are you going to try to block it or dodge, or what are you going to try to do? Get away or whatever. But yeah, that's more player choice. That's kind of you really got to decide what you're going to do in certain situations.
And that's why they're two separate concepts, because a player has agency in terms of creating the theme, but the DM is the one who presents the choices. The player has to make the choice, so the DM doesn't know which way the player is going to go. But as we said before, it doesn't matter really which way they go, because you can maneuver things back into place. It gives the characters the illusion of choice, which makes it, their involvement in the story is still important. But be wary of true problematic railroading is when you're not giving the players any kind of choice. You just say, you go into the dark wood and you meet the old lady with a bag. You didn't give them any kind of choice. You didn't give them any kind of, you're basically just talking the whole time. And I see this a lot on online streams where DMs talk for like 20 minutes describing scenes and things. It's like, this should have been role played. If you're speaking for more than 30 seconds to a minute, something's wrong. You need to have the players involved, asking questions. Part of player agency is getting the players to ask questions. And we said in one of our previous videos, when you were, how to present meaningful choices, when you present something succinctly, people are going to go, okay, well, they want a little bit more information. So they're going to ask questions about what it is that you said. And that's part of player agency. They're questioning so they can get more information and add to what they already know.
Yeah, Gareth, that is a great point, because you want players to be involved. You don't want to drone on as a DM or GM and just keep, filling in all the blanks. Don't fill in all the blanks. Let the players ask questions to fill in the blanks. As we talked about in a previous video, where players, are doing perception checks and they're each learning something new, from the perception checks. That's getting them involved. You could sit there and drone on for, minutes describing something and not let them have, any kind of input, and you're going to lose the players fast. But if you make your descriptions short and sweet and, kind of pick their interest, they are going to start asking questions, which is much more interesting and engaging for them, as opposed to you just droning on and reading.
I think railroading is thrown around. It's a blanket term that people just, throw around. What they really mean is, don't give the players no options. Give the players at least 2 options in every single circumstance. Give them 2 things they can create as a goal. Give them 2 options in terms of what they can do. All these sort of things. The more options you provide, the better, but don't provide too many options, because as we talked about in meaningful choices, too many options means the players get very confused and they don't know what to do. So limit the amount of choices that you give players. and allow them to maximize adding to the theme and description of the game, because that's how they are investing into the game.
And you know, as a DM, you could just make things happen, right? You can just have stuff happen. But think about this. It's so much more interesting when they make the choice, okay? When they make the choice and they do something and there's a consequence, that's way more interesting than you just telling them things that just are railroad to happen, right? Or just on the story arc, and they're gonna happen no matter what they do. Their choice doesn't matter. Oh, that kills the game so fast. Please don't do that. But their choices need to matter. So yeah, and the game is so much more interesting if they do, and if they see the results of those choices, not just choices in tactical things like combat or whatever, that's pretty obvious, but choices that they make in the game that are story driven, right? And they see that their choices had some kind of consequence. So those are always super interesting and much more fun than you just telling them, just keep, you know, adding to the story without their input. So yeah, definitely you want their input, you want their choices.
I like to make players roll to remember things. So they've got to do a wisdom check and they don't know why. And it's to remember that they've got a horse that's carrying all their gold. Otherwise you get to the small town and you haven't got any money. So, what? You didn't bring the horses with you. Ah, man! Now they've got to go to a quest, go to find their own gold. You've created a whole new storyline because they failed a wisdom check. If you had just said, oh, don't forget your horses, you know, you kind of limit that. I mean, I'm not saying that that's bad. I'm just saying that that's another way to use something that the players have done to make more of a story out of it. And I've done that a lot. Some players of mine, they hate the fact that they have this donkey that follows them everywhere. They should never, ever have got this donkey. And it goes with them everywhere. It literally will walk into the taverns. It will go. It does not consider itself chattel. It just decides. It goes everywhere. It goes into the dungeon. It goes in with fights. And because it's carrying all the gold, when it starts to run away, you know, they're busy trying to fight the goblins, and the donkey's running away with all their gold. And like, okay, we got a little bit of a dilemma happening here. Do we kill the goblins or do we go after the damn donkey? So you can do all kinds of cool things because, you know, the players have, I mean, it was not my intention to put a donkey into the game. The players were like, well, we don't want to carry around all this gold, so we're going to get this donkey. And man, did they regret getting that damn donkey. First time they get to an altar, we're going to sacrifice the donkey.
Always mind that stuff those players give you, because you can use it in game. It's those choices they make that make the game interesting. So you want to mind that stuff. That stuff is like gold, right? And you can have so much fun with that. Like the donkey thing is great. I love that. That's such a great example of, you know, the players, the agency of getting the donkey, and then just the choices they have to make, you know, dealing with it. So just so fun. Thanks for sharing that, Gareth.
One of my players has a sage saying that says, never talk about what you think might be happening, because that will happen. Don't say, geez, I think this is a marauding band of goblins that's going to attack us, because that's probably going to happen. That's part of player agency. You open your mouth and you start saying things. You start saying, oh, I wonder if this is X, Y, and Z. And the DM's going, that's actually cooler than what I had planned, so I'm going to do that instead. So that's part of player agency. When you're talking about the game, the DM's listening going, that's more cunning than I am, so I'm going to make myself look more cunning, and I'm going to take that and I'm going to do an extra little thing to it and make it even more cunning. So, you know, that's where, you know, if you were purely giving the players no choice, you're not getting all those sort of fun elements that come into the games, and you're not allowing the players to add elements and to do things that are unexpected. You're not going to get these sort of memorable moments like this donkey that, you know, has been following around for like 7 or 8 campaigns. They're sick and tired of this thing. It's going to follow them to death, like into the netherworld. No matter where they go, this thing is going to be there.
And, you know, of course, you know, there's a lot of different ways that DMs run, and some are really good at improv and some aren't. They want meticulous notes and that kind of thing. But there can be a danger in that kind of too meticulously planning everything, right? Because when other people are involved, nothing's going to go to your plan, okay? So what I find is it's much better to have a loose idea of the plot, like what are the key points, what should happen, right? And then let the players, you know, interject into that and change it if need be, because if you make it too stringent, if you make everything too, you know, this must depend on this and this, it's going to quickly feel railroady. And players will lose interest when they don't have that agency and choice. So keep it, I like to have it a bit loosey-goosey, right? Where I have the ideas formed for what, you know, I think is going to happen, but I'm always willing to change that depending on what the players do. So I think that's a good way to DM, and just don't over plan and don't plan everything, because your plan will be trampled on by the players. And honestly, the game is usually much more interesting if you do that, because the players, like I say, will feed you stuff and change the story and make it much more interesting than you yourself could have thought of, because you've got all these brains interjecting into this narrative, into the plot, and well, you've only got your one brain, right? And you may be, you know, thinking in a certain direction, and they're actually adding to it or taking it in another direction. That can really add interest to the game.
And part of the reason why we write the modules the way that we do is so that you as the DM have these open areas where you can add your things, but players can add things as well. Because there's a lot of modules out there where it's like, it's quite railroady in that you don't have much of a choice. This is what happens, bang, bang, bang. You know, obviously, you know, as writers, we have to kind of consider this is what's going to happen, and there's a sequence of events. But an event-driven story means you can space out the events. It doesn't, you as the DM decide how these events are going to be spaced out, what you're going to put in between. If you want to have a little bit of a street fight in the streets of Southwood, you can have that. It may not actually be in the module, you know, so you can really go to town, literally and figuratively, and add these elements in. And we expect you and the players to be doing these things, and that's why we write them the way that we write them, because we want them to be open and we want them to be hackable and accessible.
Like, that is a great point, Gareth. You know, like, our modules kind of have our philosophy, right? Well, not kind of, they do have our philosophy because we wrote them. But our philosophy is to, you know, not make it, you know, just A, B, C, D, E, F, G. You know, it's like they're more like, you know, things floating around, and, you know, wherever the players are, you know, whatever the players are interested in, where they go or whatever they interact, that's when it's, you know, kind of activates something. It's not like, oh, you have to go on this, you know, 1, 2, 3, or you're going to ruin the story. You know, that's nothing like that. It's like we really embrace this philosophy of, you know, giving the players agency and that kind of thing, and choices, because that's how we like to run our games. So I'm sure you'll enjoy how we've written the modules, and I in particular, and Gareth, we both agree on this kind of methodology of, you know, running adventures this way, and I think you'll enjoy it also.
If you're interested in that module, check it out on our website, questgivers.com, and we'll see you in the next video.